I want to acknowledge the dedication, the commitment of Deputy Troy for running to the forefront on this very important issue that affects so many families out there in the context of childcare. Minister, despite significant improvement made during previous administrations in terms of both regulation and in funding, early child care and indeed education for infants in this country has fallen significantly behind our European competitors and comparisons. There is, as you are aware, Minister, a White House report entitled The Economics of Early Childhood Investment. And in essence, it put, I quote, that early childhood, beginning in infancy, is a period of profound significance in terms of the advancement, the reasoning, the language, the acquisition, the problem solving, the importance of a child in terms of environment that can be dramatically influenced to the degree, to the pace that they advance in society. So, Minister, it is critical, it's a critical period in a child's life, their development, and to ensure that effective early childhood care and education plays a significant role in terms of the outcomes for children in society, especially for those with barriers to learning, those who may have an intellectual barrier or indeed a social barrier. And Minister, there are near 250,000, in fact 266,000 households in this country that has a child under the age of 5. And that's relatively high compared to our EU partners. The number of under 5s is set to increase significantly into the future, and we can both agree on that. But childcare costs in Ireland are the highest in Europe, and many parents are paying more. Indeed, in my own instance, we're paying more in childcare than we're paying on our mortgages. And it's leaving, Minister, families in terrible domestic financial strain. And it's an act that indeed is pushing women, particularly out of the workforce because of the difficulties in terms of accessing affordable childcare. Minister, it's this increased financial strain that's leaving many women, still mainly women in this society, who have to make the stark choice about having to quit the workforce, sacrificing their long-term potential, or indeed working at a net loss in terms of their income. Minister, also for one-parent families, the choice is even starker because childcare costs, they indeed have a perverse effect by which one parent could be driven even further into poverty, that family, that child, that mother into poverty, in that they can't take up employment. And indeed, the figures produced by the Minister for Social Protection, her own department, show that 12,000 one-parent families will be indeed €86, worse off per week following the implementation of what we call reforms on the package of the single-parent package. And these are reforms that have been driven by this government, and there are reforms aimed, I believe, that should have been aimed about encouraging parents into the workforce, but indeed it's having a reverse effect in the context of its strategy. And it's a piteously low bar that will leave many parents either trapped in low pay, low-paid employment where they offer significant flexibility, that they're being driven into poverty by both a mixture of poor employment and indeed poor reforms by the Minister in the context of childcare costs. And changes to eligibility, the requirement means that over 30,000 families, Minister, will have to see these supports removed in July of this year. And that's going to have a very difficult impact on families. You're using a carrot to reduce the cost. It's a very difficult stick for families to face in the context of addressing affordable childcare. And Minister, do you see all of these measures have been part of what I regard as an anti-family, anti-woman approach in this government, because you have engaged in a campaign that has had negative consequences on women. And all you have to do is look at recent budgets, indeed budgets since the outset of this government, that have seen cuts in child benefit, reform to maternity leave addressed negatively, cuts in respite care, cuts in the context of reforms for one-parent family supports. And this is having a devastating consequence for lone-parent families who are trying to address and access a labour market but are finding it next to near impossible because of your lack of ambition in the context of childcare. I now want to turn to Laskin Corley, the issue of provision of early childcare needs in terms of children with special needs. And there is no national plan in this country for early intervention for children with special needs, particularly for those who are under the age of 4. And we need to see a special emphasis in any policy in the context of the development of childcare strategies in this country that would see a situation for children who have a minor disability provided for in the context of the access to the adoption of childcare settings that would address the needs of that child. Because, Minister, mainstream early childhood services do not have in this country adequate funding, and we need to provide an equality of access to ensure that children who may have a minor disability have the same chance as able-bodied children to successfully succeed in society. And the first step of that success is having access to affordable childcare. So the lack of specific inclusion or guidelines for early childhood is a major barrier for achievement in this country. And clearly, Minister, the practice in the context of providing for mainstream childcare access for children with disabilities is not a priority in this government. Minister, it's estimated that approximately 6,300 children with disabilities are in attendance across early childhood services in this country. And either parents or service providers are expected to provide the funding, the additional cost to ensure that they employ a special needs assistance. This is completely unacceptable, Minister. It is completely unacceptable, and it's the isolation of the most vulnerable children in society who may have a disability, who want that first step into equality of society, and to see that they have to provide for that and their families are struggling with those difficulties. It is unacceptable. And it is a barrier in terms of the access to, indeed, to the universal free preschool year for some children, and that is evidenced from research, because targeted initiatives would and should enable children with disabilities or special needs to participate with their peers as equals in society. This is not the situation, and it's not a priority, Minister, of this government. Finally, Minister, I'd like to address those who provide the service themselves, the service providers, those that invest in the enterprise of providing childcare services. It is not enough to invest in the provision of childcare for parents alone or in isolation without indeed a significant investment or strategic engagement or approach with those who in a whole provide a consistent service to the children in this society. And if we were to do so, we would ignore the research that is there that devalues the contribution, the commitment, the education that's provided by service providers in our community. But one of the key problems for the childcare sector today is the poor pay and benefits that they have to offer their workers. That is despite increased regulation, increased workload, increased requirement for training. The average early educators in this country get paid less than €9.50 per hour. And that's unsurprisingly a situation that exists in this country, despite the fact that they have to hold significant qualifications, diplomas, FETAC, and are now in a situation where they're not financially rewarded for their endeavours to provide a qualification and support for childhood services in this country. The average size of a preschool service in Ireland today is 5 staff members per service provision. And as a ratio of the governed regulation requirements, small to medium services struggle every day to meet these targets, because you have set out a situation where the difficulties with labour costs, the difficulties as had been outlined earlier on, and the difficulties with rates, the department failing to demonstrate any meaningful engagement, particularly through you, Minister, to provide for any leadership in terms of direction on those who are grossly underpaid in the service, and those who provide a service who invested significantly at the great cost of their own domestic circumstances. So, Minister, unless the government commits itself directly in early childhood years, we are going to postpone a significant situation where we're going to see a time bomb in the context of the education of our children. And that's why we are asking you, Minister, to positively consider directly intervening to ensure that the investment that is required for early education in this country is provided in the Learner Fund. Can I conclude, Minister, by stating that a universal system of in-service training is required to be established for the provision of qualification and practices in terms of professional development of staff within the childhood services. And it is, I believe, a genuine attempt to be progressive, to provide within the sector a dialogue, a recognition of the qualification of professional workers within childcare. And Minister, I think it's required and incumbent on you to immediately engage with a dialogue with the childcare services in this country, and to ensure that we don't have a fragmented approach that has failed in respect to years upon years of commitment and investment, where we've had successive governments successfully investing into this area that will soon be lost to society by your inaction and the lack of leadership.